Virtua Fighter 2 is a fighting game developed by Sega. It is the sequel to Virtua Fighter and the second game in the Virtua Fighter series. It was created by Sega's Yu Suzuki header 2AM and was released in the arcade in 1994. It was ported to the Sega Saturn in 1995 and Microsoft Windows in 1997. In 1996, a super-deformed version of the game of Virtua Fighter Kids arrived in arcades and was ported to the Sega Saturn. A 2D remake was released for the Mega Drive Genesis in 1996. In addition, Virtua Fighter 2 was converted for the PlayStation 2 in 2004 as part of Sega's Ages 2500 series in Japan. The Mega Drive Genesis port was re-released on the PS2 and PSP in 2006 as part of Sega Genesis Collection, on the Virtual Console for the Wii on March 20, 2007 and April 16, 2007, and for iOS on January 20, 2011. Virtua Fighter 2 was known for its breakthrough graphics. It used Sega's Model 2 arcade hardware to run the game at 60 frames per second at a high resolution with no slowdown. It introduced the use of texture map 3D characters and motion capture animation technology. The Saturn version was also well received for its graphics and gameplay. It became a huge hit in Japan and sold relatively well in other markets, notably the UK, where the Prince was crowned by Sega Europe as the official UK Virtua Fighter 2 champion. The arena size could be adjusted up to a very small platform or all the way to 82 meters. This is the only game in the series, other than Virtua Fighter Remix, that could have such size adjustments. The physical energy meter could also be adjusted to infinity, giving the player the advantage when beating opponents or practicing moves against the computer player. Adjusting the arena to a smaller size and giving the characters infinite health could lead to mock sumo matches, wherein victory is achieved by knocking the other player's character out of the ring. Characters. Returning characters: Akira Yuki, Pari-chan, Lao-chan, Wolf Hawkfield, Jeffrey McQuild, Cage Maru, Sarah Bryant, Jackie Bryant, Dural. New characters: Shun Dai, Lion Raffle. Development. At the beginning of 1995, Sega 2AM's Sega Saturn division was split into 3 sub-departments, each one charged with porting a different arcade game to the Saturn: Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop, and Daytona USA. Due to unexpectedly slow progress in the Daytona USA port, a number of members of the Virtua Fighter 2 team were reassigned to Daytona USA. In March, 2AM Research completed the Sega Graphics Library, a Saturn operating system which made it feasible to create a near-arcade perfect port of Virtua Fighter 2 for the Saturn. After completing the Daytona USA port in April, the team took a short holiday before beginning work on the Virtua Fighter 2 conversion in earnest. In June, 2AM gave the first public demonstration of Saturn Virtua Fighter 2 at the Tokyo Toy Show. To increase confidence in the accuracy of the port, they displayed non-playable demos of the characters Lion, Shun, Pari, and Lao running on the Saturn hardware at 60 frames per second, the same speed as the arcade version. However, 2AM continued to face problems in creating an accurate port for the Saturn. Due to the high number of moves in Virtua Fighter 2, months had to be spent on developing compression techniques in order to fit all of the game's moves onto a single CD. Also, in order to maintain the 60 frames per second, the Saturn version could not use nearly as many polygons as the arcade version. To make this difference less apparent, the programming team used texture mapping on the characters, taking advantage of the fact that the Saturn could map 16 different colors to each polygon, whereas the Model 2 arcade hardware could map only one. In addition, the polygon background objects of the arcade version were replaced with parallax scrolling playfields with selective scaling. The 2AM team also used data from Virtua Fighter Remix as a reference for some elements. In an interview during development, Keiji Okayasu discussed the team's struggles with getting the Saturn version to run at 60 frames per second. If we didn't have to consider the speed, we could do the conversion very quickly. But with so much data, we can only move slowly. With Virtua Fighter 1 we could use the arcade data for each technique with just a few changes, but with 2 there's just too much data. But we have done well, although how is a secret. I think we couldn't have made 2 if we hadn't made the first conversion, but it's just as tough. We owe a lot to the new SGLOS, Sega Graphics Library Operating System, software. By the end of September, hit detection had been enabled, and the now fully playable conversion was displayed at the JAMA show. Taking into account audience reactions at the JAMA show, the team spent the next 2 months on final adjustments, play testing, and the addition of Saturn-specific options. Development on the port was completed in November 1995. Release. Virtua Fighter 2.1 is a revised version featuring retweaked gameplay, slightly enhanced graphics and the ability to play as Dural. Though it was never released outside Japan, it is possible to switch to the 2.1 game mechanics in the Saturn and PC ports. However, none of the other features are updated. This version was also released in the Sega Ages 2500 series. In Japan, a Virtua Fighter 2 CG portrait series of discs were released for the Saturn. Each of the 11 discs contained a slideshow of high-resolution CG stills of the character engaged in non-fighting activities such as playing pool or eating ice cream, backed by a Japanese pop song, as well as a karaoke mode. Reception. Sega reported pre-orders of 1.5 million units for Virtua Fighter 2 in Japan, which is nearly as many of the number of Saturns that had been sold in Japan at that point. At the time of its release, Virtua Fighter 2 was the top-selling game for the Saturn, and remains the highest-selling Saturn game in Japan with 1.7 million copies. Virtua Fighter 2 was critically acclaimed upon release. Next Generation gave the game a perfect 5/5 stars, calling it the ultimate arcade translation and the best fighting game ever. The magazine cited its accurate representation of 10 very distinct and realistic fighting styles, remarkable AI, and a general attention to detail that sets a new mark for quality game design. Sega Saturn magazine gave the Saturn version a 98%. Citing the smooth frame rate, the realistically varied reactions to blows, the huge variety of moves, and the addition of features such as Team Battle Mode, similarly praising the variety of moves and the accuracy of the port. Game Revolution gave the Saturn version an A and concluded that Virtua Fighter 2 for the Saturn looks better and smoother than any other polygonal fighting game for the next generation systems. This just might be the best home console fighting game ever. GamePro's Scary Larry called it the game to own if you have a Saturn, citing the authentic fighting styles and moves, the new modes, the realistic animations with strong attention to detail, and the easy-to-master controls. He gave it a perfect score in all 4 categories. The 4 reviewers of Electronic Gaming Monthly felt the port was not as arcade-perfect as it could have been, but highly praised the wealth of options and modes, with 2 of their reviewers declaring it by far the best fighting game on the Saturn thus far. Game Informer's Andy, Reiner and Paul praised Virtua Fighter 2 for its depth and variety, but criticized inferior background details in the Saturn port, while Paul also felt that the original Virtua Fighter required more strategy. Maximum described the port as remarkably similar to its coin-op parent, a game that's running on hardware that's 20 times more expensive than the Sega Saturn. They particularly praised the high-resolution graphics, smooth frame rate, breathtaking variety of moves, and the numerous Saturn-exclusive modes and options. With their one criticism being the very vulnerable opponent AI, they gave it their Maximum Game of the Month award. GameSpot gave the PC version a 8.1/10. praising the game's realism, depth, and opponent AI, and the PC version's inclusion of online multiplayer. They deemed it unquestionably the best fighting game on the PC, and certainly one of the finest fighting games of all time, adding that the PC version rivals even the excellent Sega Saturn console port. Retrospective feedback on the Saturn version has continued to gather praise. GamesRadar ranked it the third best Sega Saturn game, stating that, with Sonic sitting much of this generation out, is there a franchise more synonymous with the Saturn than Virtua Fighter? WatchMojo ranked it as the second best Sega Saturn game, claiming that the Saturn had a lot of great fighters, but its trademark fighting series is without question the best one. IGN also ranked it as the second best Sega Saturn game, saying that the game stands head and shoulders above all 32-bit fighters. All of them. Virtua Fighter 2 was ranked as the 19th best arcade game of the 1990s by Complex. It has also been listed as one of the best games of all time by Next Generation in 1996 and 1999, IGN in 2003, Famitsu in 2006, Stuff in 2008, and Electronic Gaming Monthly in 1997, 2001 and 2006.